Hi everyone, I'm Alex Noonan from Noonan Labs, and today I'm going to start this economic data project that I've been planning for some time now. Since trying to map the entire economy is simply too much of a task, we are going to focus on the housing market first. The rationale there being is that the housing market is really important as an economic force. It's topical. Everybody's feeling the pinch, whether you're buying or renting. And finally, aspects of this will carry over to the goal of mapping the economy, so it's a good place to start. And in this video, I will cover requirements gathering, project setup, and an overview of evidence. And finally, we'll have a discussion on data visualization and my process towards it. So without further ado, let's get into. So, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? At a high level, I want to understand the drivers of housing prices in the United States. Those prices are ultimately governed by supply and demand, like almost everything else. And for this, it would be amazing if we could get a transaction log of every single real estate transaction in the United States. But that's just not going to happen. To try and be scientific about this, I'm going to start with my hypothesis that supply and demand for housing in the US is super sensitive and that small changes in either can have an outsized impact on prices. Also, I want to see which of these factors are leading indicators. And so let's make a quick wish list of data for each. And over here with supply, of course, we have housing unit, number of households, the change in all those, construction, manufacturing, and raw materials. And on the demand side of things, we're going to focus on occupancy, population growth, household formations. We'll look at the Case-Shiller Housing Index, and then we'll look at retail regional prices as well, because housing is often very localized. And finally, we'll look at the financing side of things with interest rates and financial condition. So we're going to start with housing inventory first. And this data set here on the Bureau of Labor Statistics is pretty good as it has many of the variables we're looking for that aspect. And they also have an API we can tap into. So I went ahead and got myself an API key, and you can read the guide on how to use it here. And this is the specific endpoint we'll be hitting. And let's jump into VS Code. So for this, I'm going to be querying the data from that endpoint and loading it into a DuckDB database. This function here, pretty self-explanatory, connects to the DuckDB database that's inside our evidence project. And then we're going to connect and then just drop and create the table from the data frame. And if you had like quite a large data set, it would make sense to do some upsert logic. But since we're only going to be hitting this once a quarter, um, that's just not necessary. We can just tear down and rebuild. And here we are for the inventory data set. So we're making a list for every year between 1999 and next year. And then we have a mapping data frame that converts the codes into what the data series is. We then have another dictionary for grouping them together. And this is a pretty common pattern that I do as a data engineer, where you're paginating through a REST API endpoint, taking the JSON, converting it into a data frame, and then attaching it to a larger data frame outside the loop. And it's not the most efficient way to do it, but it gets the job done. Here we are applying making the columns for the series name and plot grouping. We're then saving it to a CSV and loading into DuckDB. And that's this script. So, like I said, for this project, we're going to be using Evidence. And Evidence is an open source business intelligence tool that is pretty feature rich and highly customizable. You can run these things locally or as a web application, which we're going to do later. And I like that it lends itself to templating, has a ton of visualizations, and is really fast and snappy. Because I know I've used a lot of BI tools in my day that are like slow, and it takes the having that like longer feedback loop of like making a chart or loading a data set is really like kills my vibe. And like data visualization is supposed to be like the fun part of doing this data work. So like having a tool that's really snappy and responsive makes the process a lot more enjoyable. And that's why I like it. So we're going to hop into VS Code and I'll kind of explain how the project's set up. In the root folder, we have our git ignore requirements, that Python script I was using. And we also have our evidence project and where we are saving our CSVs if we need to do that. So inside the evidence project, you have your sources, which is where our DuckDB lives. And then you can query it with SQL files here. And you also have pages, which is where the evidence, the code you render, or the code you type for the visualizations you render. So you can add filters. It's like a blend of HTML, Markdown, and SQL, which is interesting. At first, it's a little awkward, but I've found they have great documentation on their site for having to do a lot of these visuals. You can also do like if-then logic in here, which is pretty cool. When it comes to data visualizations, most of it is ultimately a preference thing. Of course, we all remember our TUFT best practices, but having good taste helps as well. Another way that I like to approach it is to try and replicate other charts that I like, because there's no real points for originality in this game. And as I say in advertising, it ain't stealing if you put a spin on it. And the way I approach analysis and displaying data is you should display data in a way where someone can look at your analysis and you make them feel like they are arriving at this conclusion that you painstakingly laid out. So you need to incept your stakeholder in a way. And the best way to do that is to tell a story. So, like, let's say you're flowing down the page, you want each successive chart and analysis to kind of steer them in a direction and move the story along. And the way I do that is when I'm doing my analysis, I like kind of meander through the data set where I have some assumptions, I test them, I slice and dice them different ways, and I just kind of let it take me somewhere because who knows where we'll end up. And that process is how I've gotten my best results. So on this page here, I created a few charts for housing inventory level, vacancy rates, and home ownership rates. And then we have the plot of the different aspects of housing vacancies, and we can look at that stacked values or 100% stacked. And one thing that kind of jumps out to me here is this doesn't really tell a story, and there's definitely more we can do here. So what I'm going to do next is pull in the rest of our data, actually do some analysis. And I think I also want to change the color scheme here to match more of like a brand kit. And I'm going to do that all in the next video. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any updates.